I want to start with this. You say the president is a national security threat. You say he's intimidated the FBI, and you say Russia's election meddling is getting worse. Those three things taken together, in those circumstances, can we trust the FBI right now to defend American democracy?
Yes, I think so. I mean, look, I spent 20 years in the organization, over 20 years, and the men and women that I saw there that I still am in touch with, they are fearless. They're absolutely dedicated to their mission of protecting the Constitution and the American people, and I think they will continue to do that and have continued to do that. I am concerned, certainly, with some of the statements that are coming from the Attorney General talking about how our investigations in 2016 were based on a slender read or somehow weren't merited, that I know to be utterly false. I mean, they are ludicrous allegations, and I can't help but worry that those statements coming from the head of the Department of Justice do cast a chill across the organization. But I do think that the FBI is strong and that it's holding. I have a lot of worry that another 4 years of a Trump administration will do a lot of damage to that, though.
You mentioned those statements from the top echelons of the DOJ. Do you think that Attorney General Barr, that President Trump are pressuring the FBI to downplay any threat from Russia?
Well, I don't know what they're doing vis-a-vis the United States. I can tell you certainly that there is some indication. There was a recent whistleblower at the Department of Homeland Security in their intelligence office who said that he was directed to minimize the reporting and the intelligence collection that was going on about Russia and to focus on China or Iran instead. Now, anytime you get any sort of influence like that or alleged influence like that on intelligence gathering, that's really concerning. Because it's bad if the president isn't reading his PDB or is ignoring intelligence. But if they've actually taken the step to start trying to manipulate that or ignore things, that's really much more troubling.
Taken sort of broadly, I mean, regardless of whether we can trust what comes out of the FBI or not, is there just enough infrastructure and enough foresight for the intelligence community together to be able to ward off Russia at all this election cycle?
Well, that's a great question. As you know, the Russian government has a very complex set of tools available to it. They are attacking us in the cyber realm. They're probing voter infrastructure and voter databases and things of that nature. They're certainly trying to infiltrate both campaigns, which is something they've always done. They're very active on social media. And I'm concerned when I hear that in the media reporting that former Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen was told not to bring up the issue at the White House because it would infuriate the president. That bothers me because that's the only way we're going to have a very effective whole of government approach to combating this threat.
So are we going to be able to ward it off better than 2016?
I'm very worried about what we're looking at. We knew in 2016 that the Russians had techniques and things they might have done, and that they didn't for whatever reason. And we have every expectation that they took those things that they might have done, kind of return them to their toolkit and improve them over the last 4 years. I think when you take that, the fact that they are absolutely improving their ability to inject themselves in our election process. And when you look at how much different today's environment is than it was in 2016, I mean, we have violence, we have various, opponents inside American social issues taking up arms against each other. It is a much more of a powder keg, I think, than it was in 2016. And so for an outside adversary like Russia, that's a much more fertile environment to make mischief. And I am worried about it.
Let's talk a little bit about your book more specifically. It's called Compromised. What evidence do you have from your time inside the Bureau of how the president is compromised, as you call him, why he appears to be hesitant to criticize Russia?
Sure. So, I recruited spies for the United States for 20 years and fought those who were trying to recruit spies within our own government from abroad. There are a variety of ways that you can do that. When I look at President Trump in particular, two things stand out. One is certainly his ego, the way that foreign leaders, and we've seen this through things like the call he had with Ukrainian President Zelensky, how people can flatter him and play to his ego to get things. But what concerns me much more are his financial entanglements. A lot of that's classified, but some of it is coming out in the Mueller report and elsewhere. And there's one example certainly that stands out, and that was a 2016 speech in the campaign trail where he pronounced to everybody listening that he had no business involvement with Russia whatsoever. At the same moment, his personal attorney was pursuing a deal for Trump Tower and Moscow deal. Well, So that's not the truth when Trump says that. And certainly Vladimir Putin knows that's not the truth. And the minute he does that, Trump knows that Vladimir Putin knows that. And so those two become complicit in that lie. And that gives Putin and the Russians leverage over Trump to do all these inexplicable things that we've seen Trump doing that just don't make sense from the standpoint of U.S. national security.
You write about in 2016, there was a time when the president was sending a barrage of tweets targeting the FBI. Director Christopher Wray was getting ready to testify on Capitol Hill, and you say this: fear was taking its toll on the Bureau again. These FBI employees feared that because of Trump's latest tactic of intimidation against all of us, those of us in the middle of the intelligence community, Wray would be crucified by committee Republicans if he admitted that I still had a security clearance. I mean, based on what you know about the Bureau today, your friends who still work there, do they still feel that fear? Are they intimidated by the president today?
Again, I don't think there's an intimidation there. The people I knew and know are absolutely going out there day in and day out and pursuing the investigations they have in front of them with every bit of resourcefulness that they have. I am concerned, though, that when you have a president attacking not only the FBI, but look across the U.S. government, whether it's the Department of State, whether it's the U.S. intelligence community, whoever it is that says something and speaks truth to what's going on, if it is against the personal interests of the president, he unleashes an outrageous barrage of attacks. And there's no way that that doesn't have an impact on any employee. It can't not have an impact. And of course, that's the intent. And that's the purpose why he engages in this sort of behavior.
You use the term coordinate throughout the book in reference to people working on or with the Trump campaign and their relationship with Russian proxies, if you will. But the Mueller investigation did not establish that the Trump campaign coordinated with Russia. Do you have a different takeaway from your investigation than what's included in the Mueller report?
Well, I do. Look, what the Mueller report said is they could not establish coordination to prove that in a court of law. And it's really important when you read that to understand what that means and doesn't mean. What that means is they couldn't go into court, present evidence, and to a level of convincing a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that something occurred. Intelligence doesn't work that way. More often than not, when you look at things in the intelligence or counterintelligence arena, there are a lot of things that you know and are pretty sure that happened, but either because you can't admit evidence because something's classified or too sensitive, or simply because there are too many variables, you can't reach that very high level to prove a crime. But that's absolutely been twisted for people saying, oh, there was no coordination. That's not what Mueller said, and people need to be very careful not to fall for this spin that there was none.
If you were the one who had the final say on the text of that report, would it read differently?
No, because I think what Director Mueller was tasked to do was to look at violations of law. What I would point to and what I think the appropriate place are things like the Senate Intelligence Committee report that just came out, I think, last week or a week before last. Almost 1,000 pages. Bipartisan in nature, both Republican and Democratic senators signing off on this. In fact, the committee is led by the Republicans, and it lays out nearly 1,000 pages of great counterintelligence concern that pervades both the Trump campaign as well as continuing on into the Trump administration. So that's the way I would look at trying to understand what the nature of the relationship is between Trump, those around him, and Russia. And again, this is coming from a Republican-led committee, and it's the raw material, and I'd encourage everyone to read that.
All right, let's talk about your text messages. They are what vaulted you into the spotlight. You exchanged them with a colleague, and they revealed a personal bias that you say you were able to check at the door when doing your work. But you also say this in the book: I regret how effectively my words were weaponized to harm the Bureau and buttress absurd conspiracy theories about our vital work. I never foresaw the unprecedented way the nation's political dialogue would be twisted. Later on, you say you regret sending those messages, but you also say it's normal for FBI agents to have personal opinions, express them, and leave them when they walk into work. So which is it? I mean, should FBI agents feel free to express opinions about people they're investigating, or should norms change?
Well, none of those comments were made in the context of somebody we're investigating. I mean, keep in mind at the time of that, we had not opened a case into the president himself. This was a personal
but you
discussion
must have known at the time that
work.
he easily could become the target of an investigation.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, FBI agents, every American citizen, whatever their job, has a First Amendment right to have a belief about a political candidate for office. And this is no different from that. So what you're seeing is not something that I posted on Twitter or something that I said in front of an office meeting. This was a personal discussion outside of a work context. I understand that people would look at that and say, hey, this gives us some concern about, was he biased or not? But here's the fact. The Inspector General of the Department of Justice, not once but twice, did an exhaustive 3-year-long investigation where they looked at everything I said, everything I wrote, everybody I had contact with. And they determined without question that not only me, but everybody on the team had not done anything based on an improper political motive. So that ought to give you and the American people a lot of reassurance that, in fact, when I say agents have opinions and they check them at the door, that's actually what happens. And beyond that, of course, there have been multiple U.S. attorneys. There have been multiple congressional committees that have all arrived at the same truth. So what I tell you is, yeah, FBI agents, me, we all have an opinion about whichever presidential candidate is out there, but that doesn't impact our work. And in fact, it didn't impact our work from 2016 forward.
Yeah, no documentary evidence of it, but looking back now, I mean, should you have been more careful?
Yeah, of course. I absolutely regret sending those texts. And I mean, as you noted in the book, I said that quite clearly. That was really dumb to have done. And I really wish in retrospect I hadn't done it. But the fact of the matter is that was simply a personal expression, kind of talking on a text outside of a work context. And so do I regret it? Of course I do.
Do you take any responsibility for any, lost trust in the FBI among the public? Any skepticism that people at the FBI are working in earnest good faith to leave their opinions at the door?
I regret those texts, and I understand the way they were weaponized, and I do regret giving that ammunition to partisans. But what I'd point you to is, while I share that responsibility, I think it's also important to look and see what happened by the people who are weaponizing those. If you look at the way some partisans in the media and partisans in Congress and up to including the president took those and spun them, that bears some responsibility as well. So again, if you listen to the backyard conversation of any FBI agent, you'd hear a variety of things one way or the other. Did I do something in putting those in text that I shouldn't? Absolutely I did. But it isn't fair to simply say that, oh, hey, this was absolutely, there's this idea that something is foreseen or foreseeable. There was not, in the history of our kind of republic, this sort of attack on a day in, day out basis by the administration on career civil servants. That, I'm one example of just many people that the president has attempted to demonize. So again, I'm not trying to shirk or duck any responsibility here whatsoever, but I think it's important to frame the broad context of the way those were weaponized and used and put blame where it deserves to be placed.
Finally, we're going to talk to Sarah Huckabee Sanders tomorrow. And, when you were in the middle of the president's fiercest anger, she was the one speaking for him in the briefing room. After everything you've been through, you're still getting attacked by the president. He just attacked you on Twitter. If I could get the two of you in a room together, what would you say to Sarah Huckabee Sanders?
Well, the first thing I'd ask her is what she told the special counsel. Because I remember right after Director Comey was fired, she stood at the lectern at the White House, and she said that they had heard from numerous agents who were very supportive of the decision, who didn't like Director Comey, and that this was a great action by President Trump. And then when she sat down in front of Director Mueller, with a place where she had to tell the truth or be prosecuted, she in fact said that, well, that actually didn't happen. That maybe, she didn't have any actual conversations or facts to actually back up those statements. To me, that's not telling the truth. To me, that's standing up and telling the American people one thing that is not based in any fact, and specifically doing that to attack the FBI and the personnel decisions that were made. So what I would ask is, on all these cases, why these repetitive misstatements and lies coming out of the White House about things that occurred, again, because at the end of the day, if you're an adversary like Russia and you are able to get beneath those lies to the truth, all of those things, it's not just objectionable from the standpoint of the American public, but that creates a vulnerability for foreign intelligence services to gain leverage over this White House. And that bothers me. It concerns me. It creates a national security risk.
Does she bear any of the responsibility for the scrutiny that you and your family have been through?
Well, I think anybody who was involved in talking about, me and kind of sort of characterizing what had occurred and stirring up the whirlwind among the partisans in the media and elsewhere certainly creates, in the context of doing that, outright lies that are making me into some sort of, and others, again, it's not just me, it's, the whistleblowers, the people who testified in Trump's impeachment hearing and trial. Well, there were no witnesses in the trial, right? I mean, in the investigation. But all of those people, when the White House and others whipped this frenzy of kind of malicious lies, of course that stirs up people who then begin to target you. And of course, I place some of the blame at the feet of the White House.
Peter Strzok, former FBI agent and author of Compromised. It is great to talk to you. I appreciate your insight. Thanks for your time.
Great. Thanks for having me.